Dr. Michael Tildesley is an epidemiologist at the University of Warwick. Michael Tildesley, why is the R0 number so important?
This R0 that we talk about is the reproductive number. So when someone gets infected, it gives us an idea of, on average, how many people they might infect. So let's say the reproduction number is 2. Then that means that every person that gets infected will infect, on average, 2 people. And of course, you can see if you follow this pattern very quickly, the total number of infected people builds up very, very rapidly. And this is what gives us an epidemic. Now, what we're trying to do when we introduce control policies is to reduce that reproduction number as low as possible. So if we can reduce that number to be below 1, then what that means is that for every person that gets infected, then on average, and I keep saying this because it is on average, they will infect less than 1 person. Then it means that eventually the epidemic will die out.
Now, what do we think the R0 number is currently in the UK?
This is an extremely hard question to put a definitive answer on. We have pretty strong evidence to indicate that the reproduction number is currently below 1 because we're starting to see the number of daily hospitalizations go down, and there is evidence to suggest that fortunately the number of daily deaths is going down. What we don't really know yet is how far below 1 that might be. There is evidence to suggest it might be somewhere between, say, 0.6 and 0.9. And this is actually really important because if we think about lifting lockdown measures, it's really important for us to have an idea of how far below 1 we are, because as we start to lift control, we will start to see that number rise. Now, if it turns out that R0 is, say, 0.5, then we've got quite a lot of leeway. If R happens to be close to 1, then that means that, unfortunately, when we start to lift some measures, we may see it going above 1 and we may start to see cases rise again.
How do you actually work out whether it's 0.9 or 0.6? Because that seems to me, from what you're saying, to make a very big difference.
Oh, well, it does. And now the problem that we have is, of course, we only have limited knowledge of who is infected in the population because we can't test everybody. So all we can do is we can look at the data that we've got and we could make inference regarding what we think R0 might be. But if we want really, really definitive answers on that, we need to be able to have much more information about how many people may be infected with only mild symptoms in the population.
Now, at the point where we had most infection in this country, obviously fairly recently, what did we estimate the R0 was then?
This is obviously an estimate, but our estimates would suggest that R0 could have been anywhere between about 2 and 3, and some of the estimates may have put it slightly greater than 3.
Now, do we have any idea of what parts of the lockdown were most effective in reducing that from between 2 and 3 to between 0.6 and 0.9?
Now, this is actually a real challenge because one of the difficulties we have in trying to work this out is that when these lockdown measures were introduced, they were all introduced over the space, really, of 1 weekend. By that Monday, we had, obviously, schools closing, we had pubs and restaurants closing, a lot of workplaces were closing, and then on the Monday evening, there was the announcement that we were going to go into total lockdown, effectively. Now, that obviously presents us with a challenge because it's really difficult to untangle the relative effectiveness of all these different lockdown measures to work out what effect each of them have. And it may be that actually the only way we can really do that and get a real understanding of the relative effectiveness is when we start to relax procedures. And we may have to lift a certain measure, monitor what that does to the epidemic, and that will give us a much greater understanding of the effectiveness of those measures. And certainly with the discussions I've had with people sort of not in academia, is the biggest challenge that people are facing is not necessarily lockdown, but the uncertainty regarding when that might end.
Dr. Michael Tildesley,